All right. You hear me, Jordan?
Yes.
All right, sweet. So, let's see here. All right. So, like Jordan said, my name's Scott DeLong. I'm a firefighter and paramedic for the city of La Crosse in Wisconsin. Um, I've been here for about 3 years. Before that, 2 years paid on call up in the city, Twin Cities, River Grove Heights, Minnesota. Um, 13 years before that, I was doing golf course maintenance. So, weird journey, but here I am. This is my first time doing this presentation or any presentation of this kind. So I'd appreciate if you guys had questions or anything, feel free, raise your hand, use whatever means here, chat. I'd love for it to be interactive, but I know that's kind of tough. So if you have questions, let me know. And thanks to Jordan for inviting me to do this, giving me an opportunity to share my story. So it's lessons learned. It's a project I'm working on at my department, and we'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. So I'm a firefighter on the back of engine 4. This is our station and our engine. The station was built in 1941. So it's an old house. It's got 2 poles. It's pretty sweet. It's got a lot of history. Um, like I said, 3 years as a firefighter, paramedic for City of La Crosse. Um, for those of you that are unsure of where La Crosse is, there it is, southwestern Wisconsin. It's right on the border. Mississippi River splits Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're on one side, and Minnesota's on the other side. So we're kind of on an island by ourselves in terms of fire departments. Just outside of our city limits, it's very, very rural. So we have a mix of industrial, commercial, residential, urban, suburban. We have 3 universities, pretty big industrial park. We have fuel fuel docks on the river. So we have our fair share of hazmat opportunities. We have a regional airport. Um, President was there yesterday, so I got to watch Air Force One fly in. So that's kind of cool. So we have all kinds of different things, and then surrounding us are volunteer and combination departments. So presentation background, like Jordan said, that's actually Jordan in that picture, ATFD. We kind of gravitated towards each other at this class, started nerding out. He reached out to ask me to do this. I really didn't have anything when he first asked, but I have been working on a flow testing hose and nozzle project at my department, and I've kind of been looking for an opportunity to share some of this stuff. I've learned a lot. I've gotten my hand slapped, my nose slapped, anything you can imagine. I've gotten myself in some tough spots, and I feel like I've learned a ton in the last 2 years or so that I've been working on this. So happy to share. So a little background on the project that I'm working on. In 2019, the spring of 2019, I was still a probationary firefighter at my department, and I randomly took Dennis Laguerre's class, Hydrants to Nozzle. That weekend, it was a 2-day class. I drove 4 hours to city in Illinois, just outside of Chicago. I really didn't know what I was getting into, so went to the class, took a bunch of notes, and I was sitting there, I'm looking around, they're talking about water supply and hose sizes and nozzle orifices and flow and all this stuff, and I'm kind of looking around at the room, and some guys are interacting, and I'm asking myself, like, should I know all this stuff? I'm 2 years out of a county fire academy that did fire 1, fire 2, hazmat, just basic firefighting, and I felt like I didn't know anything they were talking about. I knew what he was talking about, but I just didn't feel like I understood any of it. So I came back from that class and started kind of asking questions, started looking at the fire truck differently, started looking at our nozzles and our hose our fire attack packages, our engineers compartment, the pump panel, everything, just started looking at it differently. Started asking questions, started poking around a little bit. And what I found was everybody else kind of equally didn't know anything, at least to the level that Dennis did. Anybody that's followed along in the last several years with the fire service, Dennis Laguerre is the water wizard. So I started digging in online. One of the first things I stumbled upon, I'm sure I just Googled nozzle study, was this West Metro nozzle study. As a document put together in the mid 2000s by Brian Brush and Eric Tolan. At the time, they worked for West Metro Fire in Colorado, and now Brian is a training chief in Midwest City, Oklahoma, and Eric is a captain in Denver. And it documented their evaluation of nozzles on their department at the time. But the bigger thing in this document was a 50 pages of resources of articles and links to articles of different hose and nozzle discussions. And I think that was one of the catalysts for me really digging into this stuff. I started reading, I started Googling, I started talking to people about it, and that was definitely one of the big, like, paramount documents that I've found. I stumbled upon the Book of Andy. For those of you who don't know, it's a collection of articles written by Andy Fredericks. He was on Squad 18 at FDNY and unfortunately passed away at 9/11. At the time, one of the most well-respected engine company instructors in the country. And if you read some of his articles from the late 90s, a lot of what he wrote about is stuff that we're talking about today. He was just a little bit, I think, ahead of his time. He was talking about black fire and fuel loads and all this stuff that now people are like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And talking about fire attack and getting first lines in play. Great resource. I actually, now when we get probationary firefighters, I print it and bind it for them and hand it to them. I don't really force them to read it, but I figured it's a good opportunity to talk about firemen stuff and not just probationary manuals. I've taken nozzle forward 3 times, I think. To me, that's a eye-opening class. Again, not just for skills, but for training methodology and a mindset of thinking about firefighting. If you haven't taken it, I highly recommend it. It's more than just moving hose and flowing water. Aaron Fields is his demeanor and his mentality about the fire service, I think, is great. He's very realistic. He's very practical, and he has some great experiences for the city of Seattle that really hit home with losing friends, losing family members in fires, and the importance of being really good at our job. John Hall, he's a captain in St. Paul on Engine 14. He came down to our department and did a 1-day class, I guess. He went over a presentation on hoses and nozzles and all this stuff. And I know John. I'm also the membership trustee for the Northland Fools in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And John's our education trustee. So I knew him a little bit before then. And he came down and he's kind of sparked some changes. Our guys just kind of wholesale bought nozzles, but without really looking into it. So that was one opportunity where I was able to kind of weasel my way into the training department and start asking some questions and planting some seeds. And then another thing that kind of got me into all this engine company stuff is a Facebook page, Engine Company Resurrection. It, in my opinion, is one of the most legitimate Facebook pages for fire service. It's well moderated, and you get a good representation of the fire service, different regions, different perspectives on all things engine company operations. And it's a good resource for pretty much all fire service stuff. It's well, I think it's got close to 30,000 members, and you can ask a question about anything and you'll have answers in minutes. It's pretty impressive. It's got a big file section full of documents, and it's a good resource. But these several things here were definitely like my foundation for engine company nerd time.
Scott, just one thing.
Yep.
All of these classes, information, Scott and I talked for probably almost an hour and a half prior to this. And the one thing that him and I think we agree on is getting outside the bubble, getting outside your area. And I know he's going to touch on this, but these are classes that you may struggle to find in your area, but it might be in a 2-hour drive from you. It might be that online class you got to spend $20 on, but it's outside thinking. It might get you thinking about your operations and how you do things, and it might change your entire thought process. Like Scott said, he went to a class and he looked at the engine totally. I just did EMS training, I know, boo, the other day at work, and the way that our medical director explained how to look at hypertension on an elderly patient, his thought process was, if they're normally at 180 systolic blood pressure, 110 might be hypotensive for them when they're not on their meds. And I'm like, I never thought of it like that. Changed my thought process completely. That's in the EMS world. You go to a class like this, it might change your thought process on how you're attacking fires and pulling crosslays. So get outside your four walls.
That's a great point. I forget where that comes up again, but perspective is great. If you're looking to make change in your department, you really, really have to get outside of what you do. You have to learn what other people do, not necessarily to bring it back, but you have to know what the rest of the country is doing, what other people in your region are doing. There may be some things out there that you've never even thought of before. And you can't possibly know it unless you're out there digging, looking, asking questions, networking at classes. I've met people all over the country. I've flown to Washington. I've been to Denver. I've been Illinois. I'm going to Missouri in a few weeks. Florida. I'm going to Water on the Fire. Like you really got to get out there and see what other people are doing. Let me see. Yeah, so those were kind of the initial steps. Where did I lost my? Oops. All right, so now we'll kind of get into the lessons learned. So for me, when I started this, I'm going to refer to it as this project. I don't know what I want to call it, but when I got it started in this, I really didn't know where I was going with it. I had all this new knowledge, this new perspective, and I wanted just to share it with everybody. I wanted everybody to know everything that I knew. I thought it was great. I thought the information was great. I realized that we had people, there was a disconnect on our department of all the stuff that I had learned, and it seemed like other people didn't know it. So every day I was pushing, sharing, and it was met with like, what are you doing? Where's this coming from? I was a big smoothbore guy. I told Jordan earlier that probably 4 years ago when I started on this, I would have fought tooth and nail to say smoothbore or die. I'm wearing a smoothbore hat. I'm not going to lie, that's my preference, but I had a reputation at my department of being the smoothbore guy. It wasn't a common practice for us. They had a bad experience probably a year or two before I started where they put them on the trucks. They didn't test them. They didn't train with them. and they had really bad experiences. They put 15/16 on some old hose, thought that to get 50 at the tip, you pumped it at 90 because of the textbook number of 10 psi per 50 feet. And they had kinks, and they blamed it on the nozzle, and it had a bad reputation. So when a new guy comes in and says that he likes smoothbore nozzles, I was fighting an uphill battle. I didn't really realize it at the time, but now I realize it. So they, I'd get in these conversations and I felt like I had to prove to people that I knew all this stuff, and they really wasn't really well received. So it took me, it's hard to say, a few months to really realize that I had to not only learn and understand the technical side of things, I also had to learn how to communicate better. So learning kind of the art of conversation, how to bring it up without being overbearing, how to get people to engage and interact without making them feel like you're attacking them, how to help people be comfortable with being vulnerable in these conversations, with saying, I don't know the answer to these questions. I would ask them, what do you pump this at? What are your flows? And I always knew that they didn't know the answer, but I, in hindsight, felt like I was making them, like, saying, hey, I know you don't know the answer, rather than saying, let's talk about this and figure this out together. How can we get better? So it took me it's kind of been an exponential deal, where it was really, really slow at the beginning, and I was struggling to find traction. Again, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what my end goal was. I just wanted guys to talk about it. I don't know what's doing that. All right. So building support. When you are, let's say, any topic you choose, ladders, search and rescue, ventilation, anything that you believe is worth exploring change, it's hard to do it at an individual level. You need people around you. Doesn't matter how big your department is. If it's 30 people of a combination department, or like my department, we have 90 people. It's all career. You need a group of people around you at all different levels to kind of buy into what you're doing. I was lucky. I'm going to use luck a lot in this one because I truly believe I was lucky. I was lucky to have an engineer when I started, or when I got transferred to this shift I'm on now, that let me, pick his brain, but also challenge him. He was a year away from retirement, so he had been an engineer for a really long time and was really stuck in his ways, but he was really open to me pushing him and questioning him and trying different things. So that was great. I'm lucky enough to have a captain right now that on my first day on our shift, we sat down for 2 hours. We talked about who we were, what we believed in, and he has empowered me to take what I've been doing and kind of run with it. He reins me in when it's time to get reined in, but he also pushes for me with our administrative staff to get time to work on stuff, to get to the drill tower, to get time on the calendar, to do our flow testing. And he does a really good job of kind of being the bridge between my technical stuff and kind of the layman side of things. Lucky enough to be housed at a station that our guy that buys hose works at. So, at shift trade-off, it's not uncommon for me to sit with B shift and sit there for an hour and talk about firefighting because they're into the job too. I was lucky enough one day to work an overtime and cross paths with a battalion chief that gave me crap about my 7A sticker on my water bottle. He asked me, how many fires have you been into with a 7/8? And I said, well, not a lot. And that led to a 45-minute conversation of him and I going back and forth on fire tack and hoses and nozzles. And 2 days later, I was in the training captain's office talking about this flow testing project. So this didn't all happen in a short span. This was over a year of conversation after conversation after conversation, and drill and training and poking and prodding, that I built a group of people around me at different levels that were bought into what I was trying to do, trying to figure out our fire attack packages, try to be better at initial fire attack, be better at engineering. We had guys on our department that they said they go to a fire, they're going to just hit the preset, or there's a group of them say, we're just going to set it to 140 and wait for the attack crew to say more pressure, less pressure. So trying to gather all this stuff together to really identify what the issue is, or what I wanted to fix or wanted to work to fix. It took a long time, but having a group of people around me that supported it and, you know, disseminated it to their people was very helpful, and it has been helpful. When I work overtimes or I work trades, I would always try to, you know, plant seeds here or there, just to, if nothing else, just to see how other people thought. It's kind of unfair sometimes to make assumptions on what your department does based on what you've seen in your small circle. Sometimes you have to get out and ask questions and try to get the mentality of what other people are thinking, before you assume people don't know something. Maybe it was just the way they were taught. Maybe they're very open to learning, but you don't know if you don't get out and have those conversations. On that same note, you really, really have to dig into your department's history. So again, pick a topic. You have to dig into why things are the way they are. You have to ask your officers, ask people, your senior men, why you do something. They may not have an answer. Somebody might say, well, you know, if I recall correctly, so-and-so used to do this, or this chief did this, or this mechanic did this. You can kind of trace back in time where things came from. Sometimes it leads to a dead end. Sometimes it doesn't. We run the AAA at our department. One of the captains, his dad was on the department in the 70s and 80s. We called him one morning at shift change and said, hey, how long you guys been doing the AAA? And his answer was, well, as long as I could remember. So to me, that says there's really never been a whole lot of thought into why we do that hose lay. It works for us for the most part. We have a pretty diverse fire response area, so it's not the best in our downtown Main Street area, but to me, the answer to why do we use a triple load, it was because that's the way we've always done it, and with some truth and accuracy to it. How did things get to the way they are? How do you end up with a hose fleet with 10 different brands and makes of hose? How do you get to that point? Is it because your maintenance shop is ordering hose after hose testing? Is it because you had a bunch of hose fail and you needed some cheap stuff quick? That's usually the case. Or like we are now, we're moving towards replacing our fleet with combat ready, because now we've done the due diligence, we've done our work and testing and evaluation, and recognize the importance of having consistent hose. And why do things stay the way they are? Are people on your department challenging how things are? Are people comfortable with the way things are? And you kind of have to be, or tread lightly with some of these questions, because if you're a new guy or a young guy, sometimes people take that the wrong way when you start poking and prodding. If you can sell it as curiosity, that's great. But sometimes people take it as you're questioning you know, the almighty. It's kind of a weird situation. And then, you know, when you're making change city history, you got to know your demographics, your infrastructure, and your building construction. So you got to know who's living where, what your fire responses are like, what your most like your highest probability responses are. Are you going to mostly multifamilies? Are you going to, you know, 2-story residentials? Are you going to chopped up houses that are rentals? Are you going to commercial, industrial, whatever? And that's going to play into whatever, pick your strategy or tactic. Um, Infrastructure. Jordan and I were kind of talking about this earlier. He had a rough experience with a bad fire hydrant. Um, are your engines and your rigs set up for your hydrant spacing, your water main size, your fire attack options? Do you understand the ins and outs of your city? And then building construction. Um, you know, our city, it's an old river town. We have tons of buildings in our city that are built pre 1920. A lot of the houses in my district, when they show up on Zillow, I go and look, they're built in 1893, you know, 1900, 1905. And then we go into them for EMS calls or CO alarms, and you're in stone crawl spaces with boiler rooms, and you're looking at floors. You have dimensional lumber, balloon frame construction. That all plays into how you view your strategies and tactics and how you respond to fires. So understanding the history of your department and your response area is super important when you're looking to make changes. You can't just go to a class, pick something up and say, oh, we should do this because you think it's cool. It has to fit your mold. It has to fit your responses. And it really has to check a box to say, is this going to make us better? Like significantly better. Jordan and I were talking about, I like to call it return on investment. You have to choose, or you have to determine if what you're trying to change is going to be worth the return on investment. And by investment, I mean the time, the effort, the resources of your department. Are people going to see a big enough change or a effective enough change with whatever you're proposing? If you're switching from a 7/8 to a 15/16, if you're really pushing for that for whatever reason, is that going to be a significant difference? Probably not. But if you're going from, let's say, I'm not even going to use a brand, but let's say you're using hose from 15 years ago versus some of the newer hose with pretty robust construction and true internal diameters, is that going to make a difference? Yeah, probably. But you have to somehow prove to the right people that it's worth even exploring that option, not even making the change, just going down that path. Excuse me. I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's definitely unfair to make assumptions. It's easy to look at another crew, another station, another shift from the outside, and based on your short interactions to assume their knowledge base or their decision making. You really got to have conversations with people and learn what they're doing. Asking why. Through all of this, I've learned how to ask why in a amicable way. I've found that people tend to get relatively defensive when you ask them why they do something or why they made a decision. You have to approach it in a way like I have on a screen here, inquisitive or curious. Hey Cap, why do we do that this way? Why do we do this? Why did you say this? Having a good relationship with your officers, with the other people on your crew, is very helpful with this. So it's a little bit easier with the people that are that you're close with. It gets a little bit trickier when you get outside of your bubble. So if you're at a different station, a different shift, um, for people that rely heavily on mutual aid, different departments, it's good to know why people do stuff, and you to really understand any aspect of the fire service, you really, really have to know why people do stuff. And sometimes people don't have the answer. And that is an opportunity to learn. Jordan and I were talking about in our hydrant bag, we have a 2.5 gate valve that goes on the hydrant every time. And one day I kind of know the answer, but I asked, I said, "Hey, Cap, why do we put a 2.5? Why do we put that gate valve on the hydrant?" And, the four of us sitting in the circle on the apparatus bay, he's like, "Well, I think it's because of this. I think it's for an additional water supply." And I'm like, "Okay, when have you ever done that?" "Well, never." So I'm like, "Okay, so can we go out and try that, see what it does, see what it gets us, see what we get out of a hydrant, out of one extra 2.5?" And it sparks a conversation. It gets people thinking. It gets guys saying, "Whoa, I've never really thought of it that way. I've never tried that." And it gets people into in a mindset to say, "Yeah, you know what? Why are we doing that?" Not that it's bad, but it shows them that there's an opportunity to have a better understanding of what we do. And then on the bottom there it says defensive. People tend to get defensive, so don't take it personally if somebody you know reacts strangely when you ask them why. Sometimes they've never been asked why, so it's a new question for them. This kind of plays into that passion versus emotion versus expertise. I have to assume that most of us in this group, the fact that you're sitting here on I don't even know what night it is, Wednesday night, on a webinar, listening to some random dude, you have some passion for the fire service, probably a higher passion than most people. I'm one of those guys. It's really easy to be passionate about something. Having a strong understanding and getting other people to buy into it is a little bit more difficult. So you need to know, at least I learned this, or I feel this way, is in order for people to understand my position, I needed to not only know the ins and outs of what I was pushing for or am pushing for, but I also needed to know the ins and outs of their opposition. So when I was fighting the smoothbore and fog battle, I needed to know why the smoothbore was good, but I also needed to know why the fog nozzle was good. I needed to know why people preferred one way over the other, why people preferred pulling the fog nozzle versus the smoothbore. And generally it was because of a lack of understanding and what they thought they understood about the fog nozzle. We use TFT automatics, which are, anybody that has any experience with an automatic nozzle with new modern hose, it's like oil and water. They don't really make any sense, but people call them combination nozzles. They don't understand the way an automatic nozzle works. I had most people tell me that they had to get 100 psi at the tip, which is not the truth. It creates its own pressure. So that was something I learned. And I have to be open with people to say, "Hey, I didn't know how this nozzle worked either. Let's be ignorant together." We have to learn, but we can also say, "Hey, we didn't know that," and be okay with not knowing something. And then you have to be prepared too, that if somebody one day, every day, somebody's going to bring a good counter argument to you, and you have to be open enough to say, "You know what? I didn't think of that either. That's a great point." And you can use, people's misunderstandings or their good understandings of the alternative to shape the direction you're going. You may find that something that you're arguing against you didn't even know. And trying to, so being passionate's easy, controlling your emotions is tough. At least it was for me. Not taking things personally was a big lesson that I learned. I would get into these conversations and I felt like I had to argue with people, and I had to be right all the time. And luckily, I work with a engineer on another shift that we're good friends. We were good friends before this, and it felt like time after time. And he was like, "Why do you take this stuff so personal? Why are you getting so emotional?" And it took me a while and a little bit of self reflection to say, you know what? Why am I? What am I gaining by raising my voice? What am I gaining by being right? And what I found was I really wasn't gaining anything. I was probably losing momentum by being so aggressive. So I dug in. I watched videos on YouTube on public speaking and influencing people, TED Talks, all kinds of stuff, and learned that what I was missing was the ability to listen, to ask people questions and let them explain themselves and ask them questions about their answers and get I got way more out of listening to people than telling people what I knew. The stuff that I had been learning and reading and watching wasn't helping them learn. What helped other people learn was listening to them talk and then asking them questions, and there was a lot of realization in their answers to say, oh, maybe I don't know this as well as I thought I did, or maybe there's more to learn. And they would actually eventually they would say, okay, will you tell me about this, explain this to me, explain friction loss to me, explain, why the textbook number of 10 psi per 50 feet, why isn't that right? Explain to me how this works. So when I stopped taking things personally and started listening and making it more about us and we and less of me, uh, things really started clicking. So, and then on the expertise level, it's hard to be an expert on something, but you can strive for that. So you really, really have to know what you're talking about. You have to be able to know the very technical level, but you also have to be able to explain it very simply. You're going to have groups of people that you're pushing for change with, ones that are nerding out on stuff like you are and get it and will talk to you for an hour about it. And you're also going to have people that you're going to lose in 30 seconds if you're getting way too in the weeds way too early. So identifying your audience and picking and choosing how you communicate and the level of or the depth you go into. If it's a group of people that you don't spend every day with and they don't know how you communicate, you might just have to take a small chunk and pick something really, really simple, really easy to get them thinking. And you may not see them for another 2 or 3 months, but you can always go back if you take good notes or you have a good memory. You can say, well, I remember the last time I was here, we tried this. What'd you guys think? And so you really have to know the ins and outs of this stuff. That leads into education and study. So throughout this project, I really, really learned the importance of self-study and continuing education. We've kind of touched on it a couple times here, but entry-level firefighting academies, IFSTA, all that stuff is like the absolute bare bones. It's a feeble attempt at a standard for the country. It's just a way to take a test. Everybody that's taken pumper operator and fire 1 and fire 2, they are certification classes. You don't ever really get deep into any one topic. You learn the basics to pass the test. And I'm sure most people can sympathize with this. They put you through the academy and they say, all right, now go learn the job. Go learn how they do it on the streets, whether it's EMS or fire or whatever. You pass the test, you get your card, and now it's time to actually learn how to do the job. So to me, um, I've found with some of the networking I've done, and you see references to guys from the 60s and all the way back to the 1800s. Freeman, Ripley, Lloyd Lehman, trying to think. William E. Clark, that book right there, Firefighting Practices, Principles and Practices. You start to see, you read articles, you read books, you look at papers people write, and you look at the bibliographies. And I've gotten this from Fields is big on this, bibliography. Start poking around in there. Start looking at old stuff, new stuff. It's pretty eye-opening when you look back 100 years and guys are writing about 1.125" smoothbore tips and stream quality and reach, and like guys were doing this 100 years ago. Nothing we're doing right now is new or different. It might be called something different. It might be packaged a little bit differently. It might be looked at a little bit differently because of fire behavior, but it's all cyclical. Learning the history of the automatic nozzle was huge. Automatic nozzles were designed for master stream use in the 60s. In, I think it was Gary, Indiana, they had poor water supply. The goal was to get a good stream until they got a good water supply. And then somebody along the lines picked it up and said, hey, let's put this on a hand line. And then some genius salesman tricked people into buying these things. And then, hey, Corey, if you guys reach out to me, I can send you a list of books and articles and stuff or whatever. So I seen him taking a picture. You can take a picture if you want. It's all good. But over the last year, this is a number of books I've read, I've referenced.
Thank you.
Yeah. The bound ones are Lloyd Lehman's books, UL Studies. That Fire Stream Management Handbook is kind of like a engine company Bible. Firefighting Principles and Practices is referenced by everybody. I couldn't recommend that one more. And then those books on the right, a lot of those, I think only one of those is a fire service. Two of them are. Scott Thompson's book. And then there's Fire Stream Tables. That's, I believe that one's Ripley or Freeman from like 1894. So it's kind of interesting.
Scott,
yeah.
Not to interrupt, my apologies, but I'm pretty sure most of the bound ones you have can be found in the file section of Engine Company Resurrection.
Either that or I have them. So if anybody wants them, reach out to me after this. I'll give you my contact at the end.
Cool.
They've been shared to me, so I'll share them with anybody. It's great. If you're a fire nerd and you're into the history of the fire service, there's some great stuff in there. But I got emails in those folders. The main point of this slide is to just show there's a ton of work that went into this and a ton of learning. Those books on the right, a lot of them are either business books or sociology. So Catalyst and Contagious are two books that are directly related to making change, not specific to the fire service, but in general. Impossible to Ignore was a public speaking and presentation book. Talking to Strangers, that's kind of a sociology one. The Challenger Launch Decision, that's a deep, deep book, but that is where the normalization of deviance came from. If you guys have ever heard of that, pretty much highlights how doing doing the wrong thing over and over again and not getting caught leads to disaster. It's not a guarantee, but it is the prime example of doing the little wrong things over and over and over again and then becoming normal and then getting caught with your pants down essentially. So that's a handful. um I probably got 15 gigabytes of articles and books and stuff of other things I've read and referenced, that I'd be more than happy to share a reference list with people if they want it. But my point here is, it's kind of like the classes thing. If you get outside of your bubble a little bit and not just focus on fire service stuff, whether it's leadership books, podcasts, TED Talks on YouTube, there's so much information out there that can make you better at communicating and speaking, understanding how other people think and talk. It's kind of a never ending supply of information. So you can get into some rabbit holes, but there's so much stuff out there that can make you better at this and can give you insights in how to change people's minds. I hate to use the word manipulative because sometimes it feels like you are, but if you can get people to think differently and communicate effectively to get them to think differently and make them feel like they're thinking for themselves, which they are, but you have to get them there. Understanding how to do that is a huge part to getting people to buy into change. It's not easy, and you're not going to do it to everybody. You're going to have people that are going to be stubborn, but getting into it, you really, really have to get out there and learn.
I think it's more not. I know what you mean by the manipulative part. I think it's perspective. You're changing perspective.
Right. That's the word that always pops into my head, and I can't get away from it because sometimes I feel like that's what I'm doing, but all you're really doing is, you're right. You're trying to get people to look at something in a different perspective, to think differently for themselves. Mm-hmm. I mentioned there's some UL studies in there. People like to reference, they cherry pick buzzwords, right? Whether it was the basement fire study, the fire stream study, ventilation, coordinated fire attack, whatever study, people they pick and choose things. And in order to take for example, the transitional attack, that's a hot topic, right? You get people that pick on this transitional attack, and I have it in my fire department, and they think that anytime there's fire coming out a window, they're putting water in it. And when you ask them why, they reference the study. And if you actually read the study or read the summaries, the tactical considerations in it, they say, yeah, transitional attack works in certain situations, but there's no argument to say that getting the hose line in there fast will put the fire out faster. With rebound and water mapping and not hitting the seat of the fire, you might reset it, but you still have to go into the building and the nozzle has to go into the room to put the fire out. Well, what if it's on the first floor? Well, then stick the nozzle in the window and put the fire out. There's, people like to use these studies as coveralls for all fires, but you really have to look at the entirety of the study, and it's not for everybody. So if you want to change something, you have to learn it. You have to dig into it, and you have to know the ins and outs of it. You have to be able to tell those people why they're right and say, yeah, you are right. Transitional attack works in scenario A, B, and C, but let me give you this scenario. If this is a scenario and the front door is open and there's nothing coming out of it, it's the second story and it's blown out the window, why don't we just walk up the stairs and go get it? And they're like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's like, okay, well, let's think about this differently. Let's not just use this as a coverall. So I really can't stress enough reading, watching videos, networking, talking to people. Uh, Most guys that instruct in the fire service are pretty open to emails, phone calls. If you approach it the right way, there's a wealth of information out there and knowledge. Um, you just gotta understand it. Make sure other people do. Sorry, I got a puppy that's digging around back there. I think he's good. What do you think? You want to take a little break or keep going?
That's up to if you want to let your dog out real quick. We can take a quick break.
I think he's. Let me just check on him.
Okay.
He's just rustling around. I should be good. What do I got left here? I only got five more slides. So, all right, next one. Oops. All right. So priorities and choosing your battle. So I'm going to take this one, reference Aaron Fields again. When I take his class, each time I've taken it, my understanding and my thought process of training and trying to bring stuff back to my department increases. And I try to every time kind of pull him aside or catch his ear just to say there's certain Aaron's class is just as much about learning the skills as it is learning the training methodology. So he has some great insight in patience and chipping away at change. He'll tell you what they do now started 15 or 20 years ago, and they're just now teaching it in their fire academy. It's not called nozzle forward. It's called Seattle Hose Movement, but it's his program, and they do it as a department, but it has taken them 15 years to get to that point. And that puts it into perspective that if you're looking to make big change or pushing to try something new, that it ain't going to change overnight unless you have the right people in the right places and they buy into it wholeheartedly. Not always the easiest hill to climb. He references, or I'll give this example. At our department several years ago, a couple guys took the 8-hour nozzle forward class and came back because they were told to come back and teach it. For those of you that have taken it, it is not something that you go to once and bring back and change your whole department. Aaron is very open about it. He says, do not take this and go back and say, this is what we're doing. People don't like that. And it's really not the right approach to take either. What you can take back is small skills, communication techniques, ways to look at buildings, ways to look at fire behavior, and plug those into your morning tabletops and plug those into your daily drills and plug those into your self drills. If you work in a house that doesn't do strong company drills, there's tons of stuff you can do out there on your own, but you have to chip away at it. You can't come back and say, hey, let me show you guys the crooked lean, and everybody's going to look at you like you're speaking Chinese. And it's true. People, anytime I talk to people about nozzle forward at my department, they're like, oh, what are we going to do? The crooked lean? I'm like, no, we're not going to do the crooked lean. Even Aaron says in the last 5 years, he's done that 2 or 3 times in real fires. That is like a 1% skill. What you should be working on is how to move hose, how to communicate with your crew, and how to be a good nozzle person, how to move the hose, how to move the nozzle, how to water map, how to use the reach of your stream. Like there's people blow that way out of proportion. So my point is if you want to make a big change, figure out what's going to get the ball rolling on that? What is some low hanging fruit that you can change quickly or with a lot of momentum that will disseminate into other things? In my case, starting with flow testing highlights the fact that we have random hoses that don't perform the same. We have automatic nozzles that are not designed to work with new low pressure, high flow hose. Automatic nozzles that have high nozzle reaction compared to our smooth bores, and then get other options in to say, hey, we can still use fog nozzles, but why don't we use these ones that are actually designed for our fire tech packages? And then, you get better understanding of your pump panel. So that's going to, I believe, will evolve into better engineer training. Understanding your flows is going to help incident commanders and company officers and line selection and task assignment. Like this, flow testing is not just for engineers. It's for firefighters to understand what a properly pumped handline feels like, for company officers, for handline selection, like I said, and it runs the gamut. It affects people at different levels differently, but it all comes full circle eventually. So try to find something that's going to have some punch at the very beginning and has the ability to move on. Excuse me. A lot of this has been, oh, where did my thing go? Book stuff. Tabletop, apparatus bay, coffee table, training room, whatever. I think it's fair to assume that most people in the fire service are hands-on learners, visual learners. You can shove data and numbers and articles and studies. You can shove that down people's throats. But what most people really need is to get it in their hands. This picture is from the department I used to work for. I was up there helping one of their battalion chiefs start their flow testing program, but that's a lot of hose on the ground, right? But people need to get it in their hands. They need to see the flow meter. They need to see how little adjustments on the pump panel result in big changes on the flow meter. They need to hear the engine. They need to hear what it sounds like when it's at the right pressure. They need to hear what it sounds like when it's too high or too low, or, they need to feel intakes. People need to feel it to really connect the dots a lot of times. So it's nice to have the conversations. You should also have drills or examples or, quick, they don't need to be 3-hour drills, but 15 minutes, 20 minutes here or there, a quick drill just to show something. You don't have to prove anything, but say, hey, you guys want to go out and, like I talked about earlier, you want to see what it's like, what we can get if we triple tap a hydrant. What if we use a 2.5? What if we use a 5-inch off the 2.5 port? What do we get? What is our residual? What are our hydrants like? So when you have these conversations, try to have a drill in mind. So if somebody says, well, we've never done that, say, hey, Cap, can we run out real quick after lunch and do this? Or, hey, we got an hour to kill. Anybody got anything? You should always have something for, what you want to do. It's going to build confidence in the people you work with. It's going to build confidence in your company officers, and they're going to say, all right, this guy is prepared. This guy, he's got something every time. Eventually we're going to have to listen to him. And that kind of plays into this one. Rob Fisher's battalion chief out in Snohomish. He's got several podcast episodes out there with various podcast guys, and says 10% pressure 100% of the time. I kind of alluded to this earlier, that you don't want to be this is how I was at the beginning. So again, this is a lesson learned. You can't just hammer, 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 hammer. People are going to get bored of it unless you're lucky enough to be with a crew of 4 people, 3 people, whatever your companies are, that are just absolute fire nerds. You got to pull the reins back just a little bit all the time. It doesn't matter if you're doing fire attack drills, water supply drills, search and rescue drills. It all plays into it together. We did a search and rescue drill a few months ago, and my captain, we leading up to it, we were just going in to just do search and rescue, and he asked the training department, he goes, "Is there a hose line in the building? What's the building layout? What are the fire conditions?" And they kind of look at it. I'm like, "Well, I don't know. We got a smoke machine in there, zero visibility." It's like, well, we don't do fire attack and search and rescue separate. They're together. Simultaneous tasks work together. And there may be a day when you go in and do search and rescue without a hose line in the building, but if you drill well and you're well polished, those things should be happening bang, 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 bang. And your fire attack should be supporting your search and rescue. And if you're not thinking about those things and you're not asking those questions at the time when you're doing your search and rescue drills, or you're doing your ventilation drills or VES or whatever drill you're doing, if you're not asking about fire behavior and building construction that plays into all of this, you're kind of missing the point. So like for me with hoses and nozzles, every time we did something, foam eductors, people just wing it. Like, we got to actually look at this. We got to put a pressure gauge on here. What does it actually take to get 200 PSI to this thing? Like, you'll find every aspect of this, it'll play into it somehow. So don't be overbearing, but be resilient, be persistent, respectfully. Patience and preparation. I feel like this is all kind of culminated to this. I still struggle with this. This is still an ongoing project. I want to do this. I want to pump and flow water every single day. I work on an engine every single day. That's what I want to do. Some aspect of it. Some days I don't have the greatest motivation, but it's tough when you want to do it every day and you can't. So you have to somehow build patience. I say that kind of tongue in cheek because I struggle with it. You're going to meet obstacles, whether it's staffing, your training calendar, trades, overtimes, your support circles on vacation. If your captain's on vacation, your officer's on vacation, and you get an officer shipped in, maybe they don't necessarily agree with what you're doing. So you take these obstacles and you learn from them and you find a way around them, right? That book that I said, Obstacle is a Way, is a great book on not just fire. It's not a fire service book, but it's a life thing. How do you meet these obstacles and turn them into a positive experience? How do you learn from it and work around it and use it as a catapult to something bigger and better? And then you kind of got to prepare for things to not work out how you expected them to. You could do everything right and write great documents and summaries and make recommendations, and somebody can still just say no. And at that point, you can choose to stop and give up, or figure out why they said no. Maybe it's a money thing. Maybe it's a time thing. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. If you don't ask why, you're not going to know. and you can't reformulate your plan. So patience, and prepare for things to not go how you want them to. Have contingencies plans. If you have something planned for a day and it goes awry, let's say you have a big drill plan for tomorrow, and all of a sudden they call you and say, "Oh, you don't get that time." Try to condense that into an hour. If you had a 3-hour drill plan, say, "Well, what can I do in an hour? What can I do in a half hour? What can I do today to continue this and not, take one on the chin and drop your head? Keep your head up." And then the last one is difficulty and self-evaluation. I'm going to look at this two ways, one personally and one kind of at an organizational level. So at the organizational level, and this is not specific to my department, I believe it's with most departments, and it's touched on by a lot of instructors that we're victims of success. We go to fires and they go out, and we don't burn down buildings, or people don't die, people don't get hurt, and that's our metric for success. And you do that over and over and over again, and that becomes your bar for success. Did the fire go out? Did nobody get hurt? Did everybody get out? Did we not burn it down? And you do a little after action report, tell some stories, and then move on to the next one without legitimate self-evaluation to say, hey, what went well? What didn't go well? Why didn't things go well? And really, really dig into mistakes. If you don't take an objective look at your operation, whether it's at an organizational level or a personal level, it could be anything you do during your day, anything you did on that fire. If you got off and you didn't have your gloves, or your hood wasn't on, or you pulled the wrong line, or grabbed the wrong tool, or didn't grab a tool, like, you have to dig into why those things happen so you don't make that mistake the next time. And with a lack of good self-evaluation at the organizational level, then you end up in that normalization of deviance. Just because, most of your fires are room and contents fires and it took 30 gallons of water to put it out, doesn't mean the next one's not going to be the one where that's got 3 or 4 rooms going, or, a hallway, and you've never practiced flowing and moving, or you have a hand line that's pumping or flowing 75 gallons of water, but it looks like a good stream because you have an automatic nozzle on, and all of a sudden you're in the building going, hey, this fire's not going out, and you don't know why. And you come back and you talk about it, you're like, yeah, that was a big one. It got away from us. Must have just, a window broke, or it vented, or the flow path. You blame it on something, but if you don't say, hey, maybe we weren't putting enough water, or unfortunately you end up in a situation, there's plenty of examples out there of retrospective hose and nozzle studies. The one off the top of my head in Oakland, Tracy Toomey was the line of duty death on that one, where in hindsight, it was one of the contributing factors. There was a lot of things that went wrong on that fire, but the city of Oakland, when they did their retrospective study, found that they were underestimating their flows, and their pump pressures were off. They were flowing on average like 73 gallons of water a minute. So when they went into this fire, they thought they were flowing this much water, and under pump hand lines led to uncontrolled fire growth, which led to floor collapse, which led to a line of duty death. Like I said, there was a lot more to it, but there are, in that line of duty, death was attributed to fire attack. So ideally you would go through all these things, and what specific to the project I'm working on, is you do that due diligence on the front end and you have a good understanding of what you're doing, and hopefully you can avoid that. But if you just go through the motions on every fire, or you tie together a 2.5 into an 1.75 with a gated Y, and then you run a 2.5 off of that and another gated Y, and people don't understand the hydraulics of that. They do it on that one, the fire goes out and they're like, hey, remember last time when we tied together 2 gated Ys and 300 feet of hose and fire went out that time? They think that's normal. And if nobody raises their hand and says, hey, that ain't right, and then be prepared to explain why that's not right, you just continue to do those same things over and over again. And hopefully, it's kind of a dark conversation, but hopefully you avoid those catastrophes. And you do your due diligence on your training and your testing and your understanding of what you're doing and for your fire attack. And then personal self-evaluation. One big lesson I learned and I'm continuing to learn is that I don't know what I think I know. I know that's kind of a cliche thing to say, but when you take a step back and realize that there's a lot to know in this job, and that there are people out there for each discipline: rescue, hazmat, tech rescue, water rescue, fire suppression. I think we treat fire suppression as an aspect of this job that everybody understands all the time. And I think this is my personal opinion, that people don't treat it as something that they need to continually refresh on. Some departments might do a really good job of continuing education on fire behavior and building construction and flow path stuff, like stuff that's continually changing. Not continually, but it's changing. And we're so thinly spread with everything we're expected to do. It's hard to expect everybody on your department to know everything about everything. So like for me, I've found passion in engine company work. There are people that are happy, and I've had them say it, like, man, I really respect your passion for this stuff. I don't really care about it, but I'm happy that you're doing it. And that makes me feel good, because then they at least recognize that somebody in their department is taking on a project that they believe is important.
Are you going to get the rest of the ice cream?
But they're not willing to put the time and effort into. I was talking to Jordan earlier today, like hazmat doesn't interest me a whole lot. Tech rescue doesn't. I know the bare minimums, and I know what's expected of me on those calls at my level. But I also recognize the guys, if I have a question, that I go to them because they've proven that they know it and they're good at it. I think most people don't want to get in the weeds on some of this stuff. So you have to recognize which ones do, which ones don't, and really, really learn how to communicate. And I think that's the biggest thing in this whole lessons learned thing, is learning how to get people to understand your position and why it's important for that change, why what you're exploring or proposing is important to them, other firefighters, the citizens, everything that we've sworn an oath to do and to take care of, why that's important to the mission, why having the right flows on your nozzles, or knowing your flows and understanding your pump pressures is important for fire attack and search and rescue and life safety and property, all that stuff that, we know what the acronyms for, how that's going to make our job better, how that's going to make our job safer more consistent, and trying to condense that for the people that need to know it. I forget who said this recently. There's 3 things to know, or 3 ways to know things: nerd to know, need to know. What was the other one? Nice to know. And you have to pick and choose which part of that your audience needs. You know, the nerds are going to listen to the nerd stuff. There's stuff in this that everybody needs to know. And then there's some stuff that's just nice to know for people. They'll be like, oh yeah, that, you know, I never thought about, that's nice to know, but then they just move on with their day. So you have to identify those different things. I think that's it. So any questions from anybody? I will put, let me see here. Where's the chat at? I'm going to stop sharing so I can get these things back. Where'd that go? All right. I will put my, there it is. I will put my email address in the chat if anybody is interested in a list of those books, articles, all that. You can message me on Facebook. Just search my name. I should show up. Public profile. So anybody has any questions or want to talk about anything, email, direct message, whatever, I'm more than willing to talk to anybody about it. So.